Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Raven, who is also Brooke, and today I will be doing a brief video about the underappreciation of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick Lamar. Now don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and to follow me on all my social media platforms, and remember that this is my opinion.
That's my opinion!
Nothing in this video I'm saying is facts, so please don't take it as such, and let's just get right into the video. So in 2022, it had been about 5 years since Kendrick had last released a full studio album, which was Damn. And then in 2018, he released the Black Panther soundtrack that he was an executive producer of. No one had really heard from Kendrick musically for about 5 years, and just even as a person, the way he presents himself as a celebrity, he's very private. He really doesn't post on social media as much. So he kind of, is like a ghost in today's terms of what fame is, where a lot of celebrities have to be on social media to keep their name out there and to heavily promote. So it's not unusual not to hear from Kendrick, but just based on the release of his albums before that, it was usually around every 2 years, and this was a very big gap. 5 years. So he first came back in 2021 with a major collab he had with his cousin Baby Keem, which was Family Ties, which is a song that I personally love. The production is insane. The beat switches in it are to die for. And after that, it was a lot of anticipation because he said a lot of lines in that song that said that he was releasing very soon. And then on April 18th of 2022, that is when Kendrick took a quote tweet. So basically there is a tweet by someone that said Kendrick Lamar is retiring, and he quoted the tweet with a page that when you went to the page, it talked about how he had made his last final album with TDE, which is the label he had been with since the beginning of his career. And he talked about how just creatively he was kind of going through a lot of things and just going through a lot of things in life, of course, like a pretty vague way, I would say. And then a couple of weeks after that, he released The Heart Part 5, which is a part of his Heart series that he has done throughout his whole entire career. And that song was very much critically acclaimed. The video itself was very critically acclaimed, and it gave more anticipation for the album. And then a few days later after that, we found out what the title of the album was, which was Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, and how it was a double album. And then on May 13th, that is when Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was released back in 2022. Now for this album, I remember myself, I really didn't have a lot of expectations as to what this album was going to be about. I was just excited that Kendrick was back just in general. So wanted to see the artwork for the album was very much like, okay, like he has his family in the background, so maybe this album would be just more about family, holding on to having a strong family unit. Because like I said, Kendrick is very much a private person, so no one really knew much about his relationship and the dynamics of it, which is no one's business in the first place. But it did give, some people like, okay, so maybe we're just going to learn more about his family life, his family unit. It showed how he had kids, which people knew he had kids, but again, he's very private, so no one knew a lot about it, which who cares? It's literally not our business. And speaking of just on the imagery of this whole album, again, going back to the cover art itself, he's also wearing a crown of thorns in the album. And again, just having his family unit in the background, it just gave the interpretation that this would be kind of a religious family unit maybe type of album. Because with Kendrick, I feel like it's very unexpected of what you're going to hear, especially having 5 years. So it was just a lot of interpretation of what this could have been. So when speaking about the crown of thorns represents in biblical terms, it's arguably one of the most iconic images of Christ's crucifixion. Perhaps more than any form of physical suffering he endured, the crown Jesus bore signifies Christ's ultimate humility in trading his heavenly crown for a lowly crown of suffering and shame. And it also continues to say, it is also the perfect embodiment of what Christ came to earth to fulfill. For in the crown of thorns and the cross he carried, Jesus bore the weight of sin and death, paying the penalty for our sin, so that we might be forgiven, reconciled, and redeemed, as was prophesied by the prophet Isaiah. And when you listen to the album itself, the artwork definitely gives context as to what this album is supposed to be about and what this album is supposed to represent for Kendrick. And also, there were a lot of outtakes that leaked from the album photo shoot. And when you see the album photo shoot, again, it gives and the way I looked at it is preserving family. Like in one image, he has like a gun in his hand with his family in it, and just a gun by himself while he's in the house. There are a lot of images of his wife taking care of his kids while he's kind of standing there, kind of like on guard and just as a protector. And again, just when you look at the album cover, you just expect it to be an album about family. And then when you learn about the context of the Crown of Thorns, it's like, okay, so Kendrick sees himself as someone that has made a lot of sacrifice, question mark. He sees himself as someone who maybe has had to, in a way, be a light for people, be a quote unquote savior for people. So it just gave a lot of open interpretation of what this album again could be about. And just looking at the themes of the album, it talks about generational trauma, cheating, the LGBTQ plus community and the Black community, and what that can be like for someone who is LGBTQ plus in the Black community, and the acclamations that they had to go through. It talks about religion, it talks about self-doubt, and it also talks about celebrity idealization. And for this album, he did go on tour with Baby Keem and Tana Leon as his openers, and it was a worldwide tour. And also during this time, he had a pretty controversial performance at the Glastonbury Festival back in 2022. And the reason that it came with a lot of controversy is because in the performance, he was wearing a crown of thorns, and it was like a Tiffany's diamond-studded crown of thorns. And while he's performing the last song, Savior, and blood begins to come down his face as he's chanting, "They judge you, they judge Christ, Godspeed for women's rights." And at this time, there were talks that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned. And then the following month after, it actually was overturned here in the United States, because don't you just love America? And a lot of people saw him doing this as him mocking Christ and making fun of God. And I personally am not religious at all, but I absolutely could have played devil's advocate in this situation. Do I think Kendrick was trying to offend people with his performance? No. But can I absolutely see someone who is religious as they see this as a mockery just based on their ideologies? Yes, I can. So now let's get into why I feel like this album is very underappreciated in Kendrick Lamar's discography. And the main reason to me is because it is a very, very personal album. Like, I remember when I think I listened to this maybe twice before I kind of came to my conclusions for it. And the reason I could really only listen to it twice is because it was such a personal album. Like, artists of course have made personal albums before, but I think what made this so different is that Kendrick is not a personal person in the sense of, again, before this album, yes, he talked about life events that have happened in his life, but to go so deep into the emotional and mental like psyche that it had on him and how it made him feel emotionally and mentally, we never really got that side of him. Of course, you got some glimpses of that and like Sing About You, I'm Dying from Thirst, and then You, and then For Sale, and songs like that. But this was just so personal. It was very much like a movie. Like, we're just like how Good Kid Mad City is seen as a movie, this one was seen as another movie, in the sense of, again, we're just really getting a true understanding of how certain things have affected him emotionally and mentally, and actually like a full body of work. So now I'm going to get into some songs that I feel like perfectly describe what I mean when I say that this album is personal. And the first song that came to my mind was United in Grief, which was the album opener. And I personally think this is like one of Kendrick's best album openers, not just lyrically, but production wise. I just feel like it's a eerily beautiful song. And the reason I say eerily is because the way that I interpreted United in Grief is very simple. In the chorus, well, the pre-chorus, he basically talks about like, I grieve different. And for me, this was a song that stuck with me for some reason to this day, like 3 years later, because it really gives an insight on what it's like when you're just going through a lot of things mentally and emotionally, and you're just trying anything out to make yourself feel better, when you know that therapy and even sometimes medication is the answer that you need to start dealing with certain things that have happened in your life that you're probably buried in the past to cope with, basically in like a lot of materialistic ways, basically. And just that line, I grieve different, just always sticks with me, because when you think about how humans are and how we all just have different coping mechanisms, we really do deal with trauma in such different ways. And then even I feel like it's brilliant in the beginning of the song how you hear Whitney's voice and she's like, tell them what's going on with you, tell them that you've been in therapy. He talks about how he had writer's block for such a long period of time, which aided in the fact that Mr. Morale it's basically like a 5-year period between Damn and Mr. Morale because of this writer's block. And I just feel like this song perfectly opened us into an album that was going to take us for just an emotional whirlwind. And just even talking about grief in general in the Black community, I feel like is so important, because I feel like in the Black community where we really are taught to bury our feelings a lot, and that some things just don't matter, and therapy doesn't do anything, and medication doesn't do anything. So I feel like this album was just a perfect encapsulation of what this album is going to be about, and it helped establish a rapport with Kendrick about his dealings with trauma and going to therapy and just grieving in general. And then verse 2 is what stands out to me also in this album, and in that verse he says, "So what? Paralyzed, the county building controlled us. I bought a Rolex watch, I only wore it once. I bought infinity pools I never swimmed in. I watched Baby Keem buy 4 cars in 4 months. The family dynamics on repeat. The insecurities locked down on PC. I bought a .223 nobody peace treat. You won't do to me, I smell TNT. Dave got him a Porsche, so I got me a Porsche. Paid lottery for it, I ain't wanted in portions. Poverty was the case, but the money wiping the tears away." And like I said, sometimes we use very materialistic things to cope and to help us with trauma. So kudos to Kendrick for pointing that out. So for this next song, I feel like anyone that has listened to this album can agree that this is definitely one of the most gut-wrenching songs in the whole album, and that is Mother I Sober. And again, not just from the lyrics, but just from the production and how somber it feels. And then the song features Beth Gibbons, and just her delivery of the chorus in the song again just gives a very gut-wrenching reaction to this song. And like I was saying earlier, how we do have songs where we do get an understanding of Kendrick's emotional and mental psyche a little bit, like You and Sing About You Dying of Thirst. Like I said, with this album and with this one song in particular, it was very, It was very interesting and very sad to hear someone who is as private as Kendrick talk about his own mother's trauma being, and then her kind of not putting that trauma on Kendrick, but just being so hyper aware of Kendrick's safety that she was asking him, has a family member ever assaulted you? His family is asking him, did this family member do anything to you? And him saying, no, like this person never did anything to me. He talks about in the song how his generational trauma pretty much made him develop a sex addiction in his life, where he did cheat on his partner, Whitney, that he does talk about the cheating throughout the album. He talks about the relationship that he had with God over the years, and the relationship that he currently had at that time in 2022 with God. And again, talking about religion in the Black community, I feel like it's so important, especially to have open conversations about religion, whether you agree with that person or not. I just feel like religion is something that in the Black community we keep so close, and that if you don't agree with a certain person or a certain way of thinking, then you're kind of exiled. So I think him opening up about his relationship with God was a very important thing that he could have done, that he didn't have to do. And then the icing on the cake throughout the whole song is when, his partner Whitney is saying, you did it, like you talked about your grief, you talked about your trauma, and then you hear his daughter in the background saying, thank you, and it's supposed to represent him, ending that cycle of generational trauma and really trying to work on himself. So I just thought, that song itself encapsulates the album so well, and it really shows how underappreciated this album is, because like I said, just looking at the overall song in general, it really is a beautiful, eerie song. And I think that's something about most of the songs on this album, is that they're just eerily beautiful. It's actually very interesting when you think about it. And in Mother I Sober, the verse that stood out to me the most is that last verse where he says, This is post-traumatic Black families, and the sodomy today is still active. So I set free myself from all the guilt that I thought I made. So I set free my mother, all the hurt that she titled shame. So I set free my cousin, chaotic, from my mother's pain. I hope Hakeem made you proud because you ain't die in vain. So I set free the power of Whitney, may she heal us all. So I set free our children, may good karma keep them with God. So I set free the hearts filled with hatred, keep our bodies sacred. As I set free all you abusers, this is transformation. And in that song, again, I just thought it was a powerful thing to do where you're just, again, setting free your trauma. You're beginning to let go of the trauma that you feel and wanting to be better for himself and wanting better for him and his family members. So for this song definitely caused some controversy. And this song is Auntie Diaries. And the reason I chose this song as an example as to why this album is underappreciated is because, so first I'm just going to talk about where the controversy was. So in the song, Kendrick does explicitly say the F slur that is used toward gay people. And in this context, again, I absolutely understand why people in the LGBTQ plus community felt like, why did you have to say that? Do I think he said that with ill intention? No, but I'm not going to sit here and act dense and dumb as to why people felt offended by him saying a word that has really hurt a whole marginalized group of people. So like I said, I'm not defending the word, but I don't think he said it with ill intent, but I absolutely do understand why people were offended by him saying this word. And in this song, he talks about two family members that did transition, and he talks about how in the Black community, there can be a lot of ignorant ideologies around the LGBTQ plus community, and how in the Black community, a lot of people are very homophobic and transphobic. He talks about how when he was in elementary school, how a lot of kids were ignorant to the F slur, and that's when he does say it. He talks about how his aunt transitioned from a woman to a man, and he talks about how religion played a lot into when his cousin transitioned also. And in the song, he also talks about how the Black church can be very homophobic and how they deal with people who are transitioning or just part of the LGBTQ plus community in general. And also throughout the song, when he's talking about his cousin, he begins to use their dead words and then start to use their actual pronouns, which were she, her. And that was supposed to represent how for him, when he was going through that experience, it took a minute for him to get used to, not calling his cousin who did transition into her dead pronouns. And the verse that stood out to me is in the last verse, and this is when Kendrick says, I said them F-bombs, I ain't know any better. Mistakenly, I ain't think that you know any different. See, I was taught words was nothing more than a sound. If ever they was pronounced without any intentions. The second you challenged the shit I was kicking reminded me about a show I did out the city. The time I brung a fan on stage to rap, but disapproved the word that she couldn't say with me. You said, Kendrick, ain't a room for contradiction to truly understand love, switch position. F word, F word, F word, we can say it together, but only if you let a white girl say the N word. And in that verse, I think that the reason it stood out to me is because Kendrick talks about the hypocrisy of people feeling like, oh, I can say the F word and it's no big deal because I can stand with the LGBTQ plus community. But then also, okay, if you can say the F word, then you can let a white person say the N word, because based on how you're thinking, you're saying, well, if they're saying the N word, that doesn't mean they're necessarily racist. They're just singing along to a song, so there's no harm. And I think just overall, the reason I use this song to show the underappreciation of this album is because for Kendrick to talk about this in the Black community, how it can be homophobic and transphobic, and to talk about two of his relatives transitioning, I think that's such an important topic, because I feel like that's something that's never explicitly talked about. Like, we talk about everything in these podcasts that really don't have to do anything with pushing anything forward, but no one wants to talk about how transphobic and homophobic the Black community can be, which is so contradicting, because I'm not gonna go on a rant, but it's just like in the Black community, sometimes it feels like God forbid someone is gay or transgender, but let someone be an abuser and y'all be ready to just let this person go around their merry way. So I just feel like to make this type of song toward the Black community was a very important thing to do, and shows why this album is superior in Kendrick's discography. So the last song that I want to talk about to show of why I feel like this album is underappreciated is the song Savior. And in this song, Kendrick talks about celebrity idealization, and he kind of emphasizes the fact that celebrities are human, and he points out his own hypocrisies in the way that he has his own flaws. Like, for example, in the beginning of the song, he talks about, how Future gave you a money counter, but he's not your savior. Cole made you think about it, but he is not your savior. And he talks about in the song the Black Lives Matter movement and how a lot of people expected him, especially during the of George Floyd, to speak out. And he talks about how he was just going through a lot of things, and he would have felt like if he would have spoken out, it would have came from a good place. It would have been more of a PR stunt and not because he actually cares about what's going on. And he talks about people's hypocrisy in that, element of how there are people and celebrities who do just talk about these things for a publicity stunt and just to look good. And I do kind of agree with that sentiment, kind of like how companies are beginning to feel like they are just so pro-Black and so Black power, but then the moment that they realized they didn't have to be that way, they took away all these DEI programs. They began to show that they don't care about Black people. So the line made sense. And then he kind of talks about the elements of group thinking when he touches on COVID and how a lot of Christians were very anti-vax when it came to the COVID vaccine. And also the chorus is interesting because in the chorus it's kind of like saying, are you happy for me? Are you happy for me to smile on my face? Are you happy for me? And it kind of makes me think about MR.MORALE, where Kendrick talks about, when shit hits the fan, are you still a fan? And going back to what I was saying, how Kendrick kind of talks about his own hypocrisies, he says that he's more Kodak Black than pro-Black. And I have my own thoughts about Kodak on the album. I personally feel like it was unnecessary to have him on the album. In the grand scheme of things, I understand why he needed to be in the album to prove a point and to tell the story better, but Kodak is just such a controversial person, and based on the allegations against him, he doesn't seem like a good person. But if you want to be objective and look at the line, I do think that the line was an important thing, especially with what this song is about, because Kendrick is saying like, I have my own flaws too. Like, I'm not, this is how I interpreted it. He's saying I have my own flaws too. I'm not this, morally high ground person that everyone in the world thinks I am or has of me. And then the last verse is what stood out to me the most, especially when Kendrick says, "I never been sophisticated, saving face, being manipulative, such an acquired taste. I rubbed elbows with people that was for the people. They all greedy. I don't care for no public speaking. And they like to wonder where I've been, protecting my soul in the valley of silence." And like I said, I think that this song perfectly sums up how Kendrick feels in terms of feeling like he has to be someone that people think he is, or something that people want him to be. And this is him fighting against it and saying, I'm my own person at the end of the day. I am not your savior. Do not expect me to always be here to talk about every subject that you think I need to talk about or something that you think I should talk about. I have my own problems. Now that we talked about the songs, I also want to go back to the point that I was making about this album being underappreciated, about how it's very personal. That kind of goes into another point that I had, where Kendrick had been gone for so long that this album was just unexpected in terms of the themes of the album. Because once again, when you look at the song Worldwide Steppers, like, this man is explicitly saying, I used to cheat on my partner with white women and my ancestors are looking down at me and frowning and judging the shit out of me. And it's just like, what? Like, it's like, oh, okay, like, oh. And then even We Gonna Cry Together, which how I interpreted it represents how him and his partner used to fight, that I'm assuming him and his partner were having when, she would find out that he was cheating. It's just such a explicit representation of what a relationship can look like when you're arguing, especially at the end where they're like, oh. It's like We Gonna Cry Together is definitely not a song like that you're just gonna put in your queue and listen to. It's definitely one of those songs where you have to listen to it, to me, with the album, to just be like, okay, I want to listen to this song. But just even thinking of We Gonna Cry Together, and again, going back to songs like Auntie Diaries and Whether I Sober that we just talked about, Count Me Out. It's just such a personal, it's just so personal. And I think I remember tweeting something about how I can understand why someone may not mesh with this, because it is something where you don't know if you really want to go back to it fully, except just a couple of songs that are not as heavy. Like N95 is not as heavy. Silent Hill isn't as heavy, but majority of it, Purple Hearts, isn't as heavy too. But like I said, it's just an album where you really had to be in a certain mood to listen to it. And I think because it's so personable, and I think because it is so personable, it kind of messes with people's mind of whether this album does have replay value, because I definitely think this album does have replay value. And the last point that I want to make for this video is that in the future, I see this becoming like a cult classic in Kendrick's discography. Like when you go down it, it's definitely, because to me, Mr. Morale is like in the top 3 of Kendrick's discography, because to talk about just generational trauma so head on in the Black community, to talk about religion in such an explicit way in the Black community, I feel like it's such an important thing to do. And that's something about Kendrick that I respect him for as an artist, is that he's not afraid to have the conversations that need to be had in the Black community, and to just be so vulnerable in a way, especially as a Black man, to talk about how their trauma has not only affected them, but how it affected his partner, how it affected his family. I feel like it's something that is admirable for an artist to do, because that is what art is supposed to do, in my opinion. It's supposed to evoke emotion out of you that makes you think and makes you sit there and even makes you think about your own life and how you're handling your trauma, and to talk about, you know, the LGBTQ plus community in the Black community and how ignorant a lot of people can be to people who are LGBTQ plus in the Black community was very important. You know, he talks about his cheating just head on, and again, it's just like Worldwide Steppers again is a song where you listen to it and you're like, wow, like that's a lot. So I definitely feel like in the future this album will hold so much weight, just not his discography, but in rap in general, because there was a list that I did where I talked about how this album is in my top 10 albums of all time. And I do feel like people are going to catch up in the future, because this album started important conversations, and I think Kendrick again did a great job as an artist to be personable and to tell a story. Alright, you guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. I would love to hear you guys' opinions in the comments, and remember to keep it respectful. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and to always live life cute, fab, and fun, and I will see you guys in the next video.